Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for all. I am Chika Kondo, working for UNDP Africa Bureau, and I am thrilled to have you all here for this special session of AFRI CONVERSE with a very distinguished member of speakers in the panel, as well as the special facilitator for today's session. So before we start the session, I would like to ask you the following. First, you can please use the interpretation service, which is available in 3 languages, Japanese, English, and French. You can please go to the bottom of your screen to choose your preferred language. And then second, when you have questions, please use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen, and the moderator will pick it up depending on the time allocation. So since we are still having an increased number of participants, but we would like to open a basic questionnaire on your screen to answer who you are coming from. So please bear with me to identify who you are among the audience. So let me open this up. So probably you can see on your screen, what is your affiliation? So please choose one answer out of the options. And then also second, I would like to ask you if it is your first time to attend this AFRI CONVERSE series, because we've been doing this for almost a year and a half already. So thank you so much. I think since still people are answering, give us another 30 seconds and we're gonna close this question. Thank you so much. I am going to share the results. I think the majority of the participants here behind our screen is from the private sector of Japan, which is 22%, and then also followed by the students also from Africa, as well as, sorry, the international organization occupies 30% of today's audience. Eventually, we got over 400 registration for today's session, and we are expecting more people to join as we go along. And then also for the second question, if it is your first time to attend AFRI CONVERSE, half of them is a first comer, but also half of them is a repeater. And thank you so much for joining us again. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's special moderator, who is Mark Ed. So Mark is the CEO of Mark Ed Consultancy, a Lagos-based consultancy firm that works closely with the private sector, public sector, and then also the NGOs to co-develop and co-implement the solutions for Africa. He's very passionate about African development, and we are very much thrilled to have you here today with us, Mark. So Mark, floor is yours. Please take up the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Chika. Now, given how many time zones this event straddles, I'll simply greet all of you with a warm hello. I'm pleased to be invited to guide you for the next 90 minutes or so in this special session in the AFRI CONVERSE series. So our theme for this session asks the most important question of all. As we build back, or indeed forward better, as we look to recover from the pandemic's devastating effects on growth paths, and as we try to build resilience against future shocks in Africa, how do we position our beloved continent for a decade of shared prosperity? How do we collectively respond to the aspirations of both the United Nations Agenda 2030 and the African Union's Agenda 2063? At the heart of both of those global and continental ambitions is the quest for inclusive people-centered growth and economic, social, and environmental development, winning the battle against poverty. The AU agenda advocates structural transformation and a strengthening of our capacities in areas like agriculture, industry, science, and technology. Now, prior to the pandemic, things seem to be going in the right direction in Africa. But what a difference a year or two can make. I'd like you to please now turn your attentions to your screens and watch this short 2-minute video that we've put together for you that really illustrates the challenges COVID-19 has brought to the African continent. But look closely, and it also highlights the opportunities for growth and prosperity if we come together in a collaborative and concerted effort. Chika, can you please roll that video?
The African continent has an unprecedented opportunity to usher a decade of shared prosperity in the aftermath of COVID-19. Before the pandemic, African countries recorded some of the highest GDP growth rates in the world. Investment inflows increased, social indicators improved, and violent conflict abated. COVID-19 has been a costly disruptor. It also exposed societal cleavages and endemic fragility and pushed over 40 million Africans back into extreme poverty. Vaccine famine worsened the situation and could cost the continent $14 billion monthly. Repositioning Africa post-COVID requires a strategic rethink of growth, investments, and fragility. The continent could chart a different development pathway that emphasizes, first, economic growth that creates jobs and protects the planet. Second, development strategies that are inclusive and protect the vulnerable. Third, regional trade that builds on the 1.2 billion African Continental Free Trade Area market. Fourth, development financing models that optimize proceeds from the continent's natural abundance. And fifth, a greater focus on technology-driven entrepreneurship. This strategic repositioning will move Africa away from business as usual and more towards a transformative paradigm that delivers results for all. Ahead of the 8th Tokyo International Conference on African Development in 2022, UNDP and JICA are holding AFRI CONVERSE dialogues to explore viable options to accelerate the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals across Africa.
Thank you. I do encourage everyone to please join in the discussion we're going to have by typing your questions in the Q&A function here in Zoom. Or if you have comments or reactions, please send them through and I'll endeavor to read them out as time permits. Watching that video, you saw some sobering statistics there. 40 million Africans pushed back into poverty thanks to COVID. But there is a lot of cause for optimism. I'll invite your speakers to speak now. We have 4 excellent panelists, all have presentations. I'll introduce all of them at once, and then I'll give each of them about 5 to 7 minutes to make opening remarks on the theme of this session, positioning Africa for a decade of shared prosperity towards 2030, 2063. First, I'm sure there isn't anyone watching that does not know Miss Ahuna Eziakonwa. She's the director of the UNDP's Regional Bureau for Africa. RBA is big. It's got about 46 country offices in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's UNDP's main interface between the UN and regional and continental bodies on the continent, like the African Union, ECOWAS, COMESA, and SADC. Ahuna is a passionate Pan-African. And here's a good quote. Africa and Japan are special partners that built up a relationship based on trust. Now that quote's not from me. It's from our second panelist, Mr. Ryuichi Kato. Mr. Kato is the Vice President of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA. He's in charge of the TCAD process at JICA, and Mr. Kato has been involved in cooperation with African nations for many years, including assignments in Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal. Fellow countryman Susumu Subaki is panelist number 3. He is the CEO of AAIC, Asian Africa Investment and Consulting. AAIC is serious about impact investing across Africa, particularly in the healthcare sector. The company targets fast-growing companies. It provides them capital. It provides them know-how. The company brings the best of Japan to help build sustainable businesses across the continent. And last but not least, our final speaker is an able stand-in for the founder of the African Center for Economic Transformation, ACET, Dr. K.Y. Amo-Ako, who could not be here, unfortunately, today. Dr. Ed Brown is standing in. He's the Senior Director of Policy Research and Engagement at the Center. He's based in Accra, Ghana, and he's got 35 years or so in international development, half of which were spent at the World Bank. Now, I'll ask our able panelists to please stick to the allotted maximum 7 minutes for your presentation so that we have enough time for Q&A. I'll first turn to Ahuna to give her introductory remarks on the session's overarching theme. And now I understand, Ahuna, that you have to leave at 7:30 a.m. New York time. So the last 30 minutes or so of the session, you'll be represented by Dr. Raymond Gilpin, the Chief Economist at RBA. Ahuna, you have the floor.
Many thanks, Mark. Good to see you. And let me extend warm greetings to all the AFRI conversers, and to you, Mr. Kato, to Mr. Subaki, also to Dr. Ed Brown. Thank you for joining us today. So let me say, ladies and gentlemen who are listening, Africa, as most of you know by now, is a continent that's rich in both natural resources and human potential. In the 2 decades before the pandemic, this continent had its economies expanding at more than 5% annually. And this has greatly reduced extreme poverty and also increased literacy rates at a historical pace. So we're looking at a continent on the move. This progress was based on macroeconomic stability, increased investment and trade, and of course, the ongoing digital revolution across the continent. However, the benefits of this remarkable progress have not been inclusive always or sustainable. We see in way too many African countries that youth, African women, and those who reside outside major cities in what we sometimes call the periphery appear to have been left behind. While the continent sees over 10 million young people enter the job market each year, only about 3 million new jobs are created. Also, in some cases, we see rapid GDP growth that has occurred at the expense sometimes of Africa's environment. So according to the UN Environment Program, for instance, it will take $1 billion to correct the environmental damage caused by, say, for instance, some of the extractive industries on the continent. So economic progress in Africa must therefore benefit everyone, as it also tries to protect the environment and preserve it for future generations. And the COVID-19 pandemic has effectively reversed nearly 3 decades of relatively consistent development gains across the continent. The global impacts of the pandemic have had a devastating impact on the continent's finances, on productivity, and on trade. Because of COVID-19, Africa's GDP fell by over 3% in 2020, sending the continent into a recession for the first time in 25 years. Social indicators also slumped for the first time in decades, sending more than 40 million Africans back into extreme poverty and also undoing decades of steady progress. These shocks have been especially acute for those who derive their incomes and livelihoods from informal economy and whose economic activities actually halted or diminished due to lockdowns and the global economic swamp. So the workers in informal economy, which constitute up to 85% of all employed and self-employed persons in sub-Saharan Africa, are not covered by any form of social protection. So against this background, and to position Africa for a decade of shared prosperity, UNDP envisions priority action in the following 6 strategic impact areas. We're looking at strategic transformation, structural transformation, natural resource governance, affordable and sustainable energy, climate change, women and youth empowerment, as well as peace and security. So the continent's abundant minerals, agricultural, maritime, and intellectual resources could help trigger and sustain a much needed and long overdue economic revival in Africa, even if only a fraction of the almost $90 billion that UNCTAD estimates leaves Africa annually through the illicit financial flows. If that were clawed back, we would be in a position to enable the continent's natural resources to fuel sustainable development and shared prosperity. Accountability frameworks can be strengthened by supporting safeguarding the commons and also citizen platforms, developing an African brain trust on natural resource governance. So Africa is in critical need of a just green transition. And I emphasize the word just, as it is on the front lines of the world's climate emergency and ecological crisis. The region is the most climate vulnerable part of the planet right now, alongside continued rapid decline of biodiversity and ecosystems, and also serious challenges in closing that energy gap. Without urgent action to build resilience, climate change and ecological decline will lead to increasing poverty and displacement on the road to 2030. And it will serve as barriers to the recovery that we desperately need from COVID-19. So UNDP recommends a focus on advancing initiatives that future-proof COVID-19 recovery investments and advance low carbon, climate resilient, and nature-based solutions to development. Urgent action is needed, of course, for increased access to energy for the unelectrified and for access to reliable and clean energy for productive uses and improved quality of life. To support regional integration and trade, measures should be put in place to support the promotion of the AFCFTA and the AFCFTA Secretariat as a conduit for increased regional trade and the integration of local firms in regional and global value chains. Support can also be provided with proactive trade facilitation. And by partnering with the private sector, we think this can be accelerated. At the local to local level, cross-border trade and economic links can help to increase stability and sustain economies through viable markets in local products and economic opportunities for producers. And then with the energy and creative thinking of young populations across the continent, and of course the resilience that we have seen, COVID-19 proved the capability and capacity of business and entrepreneurs in Africa to produce homegrown solutions and innovation. So with the prospects of the African continental free trade area, COVID-19 has reminded us of the importance of enhancing a footprint of made in Africa products and services. Social protection, ladies and gentlemen, is another critical area laid bare by the pandemic. There is an urgent need for African countries to develop both contributory and non-contributory sustainable social protection systems as a development pathway that would cushion the impact of domestic and external shocks, but also contribute to resilience building. And with reduced opportunities and with also little or no safety nets for millions of people will be pushed into extreme poverty, erasing decades of progress in fighting poverty. So finally, as alluded earlier, illicit financial flows must be curbed, and we have to find ways to do this. African countries and the continent's development partners must work to combat these flows, which costed $88.6 billion annually due to illegal tax and commercial practices, illegal markets, theft type of activities, and terrorism financing and corruption. This is more than the approximately $60 billion in aid that Africa receives every year. So curbing this annual figure from Africa through targeted tax audit and capacity development support to tax administrations and relevant government counterparts could really help bridge half of its SDG financing gap. So together, Africa and its strategic partners such as TICAD are well placed to position this continent for a decade of shared prosperity and ending poverty, and realizing also Africa's promise as envisioned in both the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda and the Agenda 2063. I hope that the conversation today will help us deepen our thinking and action around some of these issues. Thank you, and back to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Ahuna, for opening up the conversation there. I hope we have time before you go to ask you specifically about TCAD 8. I have a couple of questions that I want answers for. So quickly, I'll move on to the next speaker. I'll turn to Mr. Keto-san, Vice President of JICA. So can you give us 7 minutes of your opening presentation on this theme, sir?
Okay. Thank you, Mark, and greetings. Good morning, Ahuna, and Susumu-san, and Ed Brown-san. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, next, please. To address the question of positioning Africa, first of all, I'd like to touch upon Africa's efforts to combat with COVID-19 pandemic. When the pandemic expanded all over the world, there was a pessimistic view on Africa's future, like as WHO estimated in May last year. Despite this view, many African countries reacted very quickly and effectively to protect themselves from the spread of COVID-19. As a result, total COVID-19 cases in Africa at the end of last year were much less than what WHO estimated. We are highly appreciating Africa's efforts and ownership. As well, we are deeply recognizing the urgent need for vaccination in Africa. As discussed in last week's G20 summit, we need to narrow vaccination gap as soon as possible to end this pandemic globally. Next, please. In the course of Africa's efforts to fight against the pandemic, Africa CDC is making remarkable contributions. As you may know, African Union established Africa CDC in 2017 after the Ebola pandemic in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia to prepare for the next possible pandemic by its own efforts. Africa CDC is a very young institute, started just 4 years ago. However, it produces remarkable achievements despite its limited resource and experience. I can say without exaggeration that African CDC is a symbolic success for Africa's solidarity and ownership to fight against the pandemic. In this regard, JICA concluded an MOC with Africa CDC in 2017. We would like to contribute to strengthening Africa CDC's regional network through linking our medical projects network, so-called PREPARE, to Africa CDC. Beyond COVID-19, JICA is planning to build a broader medical network of research institutes, laboratories, and hospitals in Africa. In doing so, we'd like to deepen our regional collaboration with Africa CDC and extend our cooperation to strengthen Africa's solidarity and ownership. Next, please. I'd like to move on to the next point. Africa has rich development assets built up by their own efforts and through cooperation with various development partners, including JICA. I'd like to raise some examples from our experience. This is an example again for combating with COVID-19 pandemic. As you may know, African countries have some difficulties to know how many people are infected with COVID-19 due to limited preparedness for PCR tests. In Ghana, Norwich Memorial Institute has rapidly expanded its capacity of PCR tests, and it has achieved 50% of the total PCR tests conducted in Ghana. And it also works as a regional hub of PCR tests of West Africa. We have observed such good example in other countries. Those development assets underpinned Africa's response to the crisis, and we contribute to future potential pandemics. Next slide, please. These assets are not limited to health sector. The upper photo shows community-wide school management, widely called School for All project, which started in Niger and is functioning in several Western African countries. This approach has succeeded not only in improving education for children, but also in building strong trust between people, community, and government. Another example is a market-oriented agriculture. This SHEP approach succeeds in changing the mentality of farmers from a conventional grow and sell to a grow to sell concept, so that farmers focus on producing what the market needs. This approach actually brought a significant increase in farmers' income in Kenya and Rwanda, and now 26 African countries are introducing this SHEP approach. For many years, African JICA and other development partners have been collaborating to build and strengthen institutional and human capacity in health, education, agriculture, and other areas. In addition to these projects, we can find so many successful cases. I believe that these assets can be the foundation for recovery and development beyond COVID-19. Next slide, please. In addition to these past achievements, we need to seek new solutions. And now we can see new homegrown solutions from Africa's own efforts are arising during this crisis. This is an example of a collaboration between AUDA NEPAD, JICA, and Boston Consulting Group. We have started Homegrown Solutions Accelerator to support Africa's private companies to provide made in Africa healthcare products and services to respond to the pandemic. Today, we are inviting Mr. Tsubaki, CEO of Asia Africa Investment and Consulting, to this event. He's also collaborating with us to give business advice and consulting to African companies. For example, Revital Healthcare, a Kenyan company, successfully increases production of medical consumables and get new money from investors, such as $4 million from the Gates Foundation, with advice and support from this platform. Also, this initiative contributes to shift from the reliance on imported healthcare goods from abroad to make African economy and society more resilient to the current and future pandemics. Next slide, please. Africa is now an epicenter of innovation and the digital transformation of the world. For example, a mobile scan solutions and multiple purpose contactless payment system. And in this slide are the innovations identified and supported by the Project Ninja, next innovation with Japan. So many African startups and entrepreneurs responded to our call for innovative solution for the COVID-19 crisis. Totally over 2,500 startups from 19 African countries applied to this business competition, and 10 startups among them got together for the online final pitch event this year. Following pitch event, JICA continues to support these African entrepreneurs and startup ecosystems and discuss how we can scale up our support to promote digital transformation and innovation in Africa. Next slide, please. Reflecting these newly arising trends, I'm sure that Africa needs new policy agenda for development under the socio-economic environment changing towards the post-COVID-19 era. In this context, JICA has started a policy research project on transformation and human security, partnering with two African think tanks, ACET and Afrobarometer, respectively. JICA expects to provide research outcomes together with African voices to political leaders gathering in TICAD 8 and promote formulating new policy agenda to achieve SDGs and Agenda 2063 beyond COVID-19 crisis. Today, we are inviting Dr. Ed Brown, Senior Director of ACET, to this event. ACET is a Ghanaian think tank and research partner of this project. ACET has created remarkable policy researches and recommendations such as African transformation reports. As we all are aware that COVID-19 crisis brings an enormous social and economic damage to Africa. We need new policy agenda to TICAD 8 by reviewing Africa's challenges and efforts for its transformation to resilient economy. He will give you a brief outline later on. Lastly, to conclude my presentation, I show you our approach towards TICAD 8 and key messages towards a resilient, inclusive, and prosperous continent. In addition, we'd like to emphasize regional integration efforts such as African Continental Free Trade Area as a key to scale up cooperation outcomes in the continental level. Finally, I'm sure we need to make next year's TICAD 8 to be an important milestone for Africa to build forward better and go beyond the COVID-19 crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kato, Vice President of JICA. I now will turn to Mr. Subaki-san. You make quite a lot of investments across Africa, and your company is something of a, I suppose, a bridge builder between Japan and the African continent. So from that unique perspective, could you please give us your opening thoughts and your presentation on how, through partnerships, we can position Africa for a decade of shared prosperity?
Okay, thank you, Mark. Anyway, thank you very much for joining everybody this session. And thank you very, very much inviting me about this honorable opportunities. Today, I'd like to show you about private investment point of view in Africa. So firstly, I'll a little bit introduce my company. Actually, AIC is Asia Africa Investment Consulting. I established this company 13 years ago. We have 4 offices in Asia and 4 offices in Africa: Nairobi, Kigali, Lagos, Johannesburg. So there are several Japanese there. So we do consulting business in Africa. At the same time, we do investment business in Africa. So most investment we focus is Africa business. So today, I'd like to show, before that, recently I published this book, in Japanese. So actually, this May, so it's amazing. So the bestseller in Amazon Japan, World Economic Situation, actually is 5 months. So I very, very feel about the many Japanese seriously interested into, addresses the Africa continents. It's definitely, I believe. So I would like to show you about the 3 key points for investment in Africa, the point of the private point of view. The one is leapfrog innovation. It's quite amazing. Because new revolution, innovation happen in Africa fast. And the second point is time machine business model. I'm going to tell you a little bit of the detail later. Actually, the Japanese know the answer. What comes next? And the third one is, it's a green revolution. It's a new wave comes. So first one, the leapfrog innovation. This is our portfolio about the Africa funds fast. Now we did invest 4 portfolios. Mostly there's advanced medical care, it's a data center or general hospital, etc. Now we did invest 18 investment portfolio. Mostly the healthcare technologies and innovations. It's a quite, the rapidly growth, such as e-commerce, fintech or insurance tech, mobile tech. It's amazing. Awful. And the third area is medical services. It's a Kato-san mentioned about the Reliance, Revital. It's very, very thankful for the owner to collaboration with JICA and the private. It's going to very, very rapidly growth also. So geologically, we are 50% invest East Africa, 30% West, 20% is North and South. These are the portfolios. This is also the amazing, the growth about mostly the healthcare technologies. This is all our investment. The one is the Egypt company, the name is Chevron. It's a telediagnosis online therapy. It's going to the 4.4 times by annual growth. It's a 440%. Next is MyDawa. It's a Kenyan company, it's a healthcare e-commerce company. It's going to 350% for the annual growth. And this is a cheaper case. Its founder is a Ugandan person. It's mostly the 77% times growth annually. So it's a quite rapid growth. And the last one is Nigeria, Reliance HMO. It's a mobile healthcare insurance provided company. It's got a 10 months, 4 times growth, 400%. It's an all-G service driven by this smartphone and IT technologies. It's so awful and amazing. So day before yesterday, this number 3 company, Cheaper Cash, announced that they're going to unicorn in Africa continent, 2 billion company. He's a founder, Ugandan. It's a smartphone basis money transfer by the continent by free. So it's going to the quite a big deal actually. It's maybe a number 9 of the Africa unicorn, I guess. Or pay, the SoftBank Vision Fund investors will pay maybe 3 billion and 300 million. So this innovation comes through. And actually, I'd like to, this is, the home health in Nigeria. It's very interesting. As you know, the all medical record, like a paper, most of the hospital, it's crazy. So it's going to, paper to all of the digital. It's a EMR, electronic medical record. Of course, this is, the latest technology comes. Or it's a cloud basis, or it's a subscription basis, or data sharing. It's a quite innovative, things that happen in Nigeria. And the second point I'd like to tell you about this time machine map. Very, very sorry about the contents is Japanese. This is actually the Africa countries and cities by GDP per capita basis, lower to highest. At the same time, I write it here, when the Japanese, time it comes. There is a green one is Africa countries and cities, and the yellow one is Asian countries. It's basically the 2014, little bit old. So actually several magic numbers there. For example, $1,000. It's quite interesting. It's actually in Japan, it's 1965. So at this time in Japan, we have Kodan Jutaku. It's a Tama New Town or Senri New Town. It's in Africa, it's affordable housing comes. And a lot of the, the motorbike comes, highways, railroad started at the $1,000 US basis. And the next interstate point is $3,000 per capita. It's in Japan, it's 1972. It's a high growth area. So it comes, a car comes, shopping mall comes, and modern food chain comes. I believe so 5 years ago, Nairobi come to $3,000 per capita. So as you know, the Kentucky comes, Domino Pizza comes, Cold Stone X comes, little bit as a Burger King comes. In Japan, 1970s is a McDonald's, first McDonald's come to Japan, Tokyo, Ginza. I'm very small. On the line was 30 minutes. Same things happen in Nairobi in the the current half. It's a Burger King. First Burger King comes to the Nairobi, so the 30 minutes long range. Oh, it's same thing happen when I'm a child. So I'm very, very surprised about that. So the same things happen. What comes next? Yeah, that is a time machine business model. I'd like to talk more, but I don't have time, so I'm going to skip around. So yeah, this is a railway term. So it seems to happen in the Shinkansen comes, Joet Shinkansen, Tok Shinkansen, it comes. So it's a Itaichiro, the Chinese one, but it's no matter. As you know, at the same time, the unicorn basis, this is a compared to continent basis. 2021 in Africa, actually we have 7 unicorns. Actually, the OPay number 8, cheaper gas maybe number 9. This number is the same as India of 6 years ago. So now India has 41 unicorns. I strongly believe next 7 years, Africa comes 30 or 40 unicorns comes in Africa continents. I definitely believe that. Okay, and the third point is the green revolution. This is power generation in Kenya by sources. As you know, the 44% geothermal, 34 hydro. Total is 78 is all the renewable energy. It's a quite, strong to export this, the electricity. As you know, recently many, sorry about all the Japanese also, such as geothermal or such as solar power, a lot of the land, lot of sun, lot of the geothermal potential. So you can export green hydro. For example, in Singapore, the 1% was such a renewable energy. So they definitely needed, as you know. This is several countries. It's renewable energy right. Top is Ethiopia and Congo. It's all hydro. It's Kenya is here. In Japan, it's only 80%, and Singapore, Hong Kong is 0% or 1%. So you can export green hydro to these countries. There's a huge, I believe, hydro fuel export to other countries. So this is a point of private investment point of view. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Subaki-san. Very interesting. I can hear the passion in your voice about the generation of technology. I mean, it really is, as you say, the next epicenter of innovation. Now, I'll now turn to Dr. Brown, last but not least, of the center, the African Center for Economic Transformation. If you look at the statistics for Africa, they're quite startling. By 2050, 1 in 4 people in the world will be an African. And what happens in Africa is so often seen as just sort of mattering to Africa, but it matters to the world, changes in Africa, whatever happens on climate, peace, democratic governance, or indeed even capitalism, is going to affect the whole world. What I like about ACET's approach is how it so often brings attention and brings African opinions and positions into the global conversations. It's always interesting to hear from your organizations, because these are often opinions that so often lack sufficient attention in global discourse, in my opinion. So, Dr. Brown, can you give us, in 7 minutes or so, your prescription on the theme of this session, please?
Thank you so much, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. I would just like to extend Dr. Mwaku's regret, the President of ACET's sincere regret for not being able to participate in this very important and timely conversation due to an emergency. I am therefore honored to participate in his stead. Ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, the COVID pandemic has underscored how most African countries remain vulnerable to external shocks. Panelists before me have provided good overview of the challenges that African economies face since the onset of the pandemic and have offered some very insightful solutions to these problems. I will therefore not delve too much into details in this issue, but I would want to attempt here to offer some complementary perspectives on how we explore, we as a continent can build back better, even as the pandemic and its continued effects are felt. Building back better requires a concerted and deliberate effort. And we at ASSET believe that economic transformation is the key to Africa building back better, resilient, and inclusive economies that can withstand future external and internal shocks. For long, the economic development discourse has broadly treated economic transformation interchangeably with structural transformation. That is the reallocation of resources and the concomitant shifts in inputs from lower productivity sectors, for example, agriculture, to industry, in particular manufacturing and to services, while recognizing that these structural shifts are at the heart of economic transformation. We at ASSET argues that there is more to transforming African economies than shifting their production and employment structures. Slide 2, please. Yeah, okay, slide 2 is there, okay. At ASSET, slide 2 is the second one. At ASSET, we see economic transformation going beyond growth for countries to transform and sustain growth. They must diversify their production and exports. They must become more they must become more competitive on international markets. They must increase productivity on all resources, inputs, especially labor, and they must upgrade technologies they use in production. If it is only by doing so can they ensure that growth improves human well-being by providing more productive jobs and higher incomes, and thus everyone shares in the new prosperity. This at ASSET we call growth with depth. Slide 3, please. So far, economic transformation story in Africa has been bleak. If you look at these definitions, the 5 key variables we're talking about, first, while growth has been strong, it is also evident that there has been reversals. Secondly, African economies have been transforming very slowly. If we use this framework that we've defined, and early progress has suffered reversals. There have been tremendous reversals. And our next African Transformation Index that comes out in February next year is going to show the trajectory of African economies in terms of their successes in transforming the economy. Third, even at times when African economies were experiencing rapid growth, they were not developing resilient economic structures and productive capacities to withstand exogenous shocks and enhance the ability to recover quickly and strongly. 4th slide, please. Now, 4th, more importantly, the COVID pandemic has heightened the necessity and urgency for Africa to accelerate economic transformation to enhance resilience of its economic structures and shocks. Yet the pandemic is still playing out, and the end is even uncertain. Ascertaining the true, full, and long-term impact and implications of transformation and growth remains a challenge. Now, African countries can use the COVID as an opportunity, as the other speakers have mentioned, to reimagine their growth models and to focus on deepening economic transformation for progress in the immediate to long term. While country circumstances may differ, there are few policy and strategies that can be deployed to accelerate economic transformation. For the sake of time, I will just focus on just a few practical and crucial policies. Can we skip slide 5 and go to slide 6? First, it is vital to strengthen resource mobilization and management. With the collapse of industry in most countries and the extra burden of debt forgiveness, related to COVID response packages. Revenue generation will become significantly more difficult. Governments, therefore, should move swiftly to identify tax loopholes and eliminate exemptions and concessions. Tax collection levels are highly uneven across the continent. This can be done in part through investing in digital technologies, as others have already mentioned, to create a more efficient tax system, simplifying VAT policies in some countries, and better enforcement of tax collection. Second is digital innovation and entrepreneurship, and which has also been mentioned. In fact, the last speaker had dwelt a lot on that. But in response to this crisis, governments across Africa are already exploring new solutions to old problems and crowding in finance to spur employment. There are already many examples of innovations, such as leveraging diaspora finance and supporting entrepreneurs. Governments are now exploring efforts to accelerate their digital economies and foster rapid and broad innovations. There has also been rapid increases in the use of contactless technologies, as was demonstrated by the previous speaker, for businesses, health, and learning. But it is important to bring regulation up to date. That's critical to allow technology and innovation to thrive and standardized regulations so that innovations across borders. Examples of many benefits of innovation and digitalization includes improving the transaction speed, reducing business costs, facilitating intra-African trade, as was mentioned earlier on the AFCFTA. It's very, very important, and expanding financial access, all while enabling the collection of accurate data. That has been very critical for African development. Lack of accurate data has been a major, major problem in trying to plan and develop African economies. So this would inform better policy and close the critical gaps, such as in health and education. The next slide, please. But thirdly, we must create enabling business investment. And this is where Mr. Susumu's presentation comes to light. African economies will only recover from this crisis with robust growth if there is a thriving private sector. Efforts should be taken now to pave the way for easy and rapid private sector activities, including support to SMEs to become investment ready and competitive. In fact, this is an area where ASET is working extensively on to see how to shore up the capabilities of small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, the pilot is in Ghana. These are largely brownfields, and we're providing them with what we call intensive care, which is pre-financing, joint ventureship kind of support to bring them to levels that they become investment ready and attractive to JVs and also other FDIs to come in. Slide 7, please. The question of how to successfully transform African economies is at the core of ASET's work. As a Pan-African institution championing economic transformation, we bring together African expertise to find solutions to Africans' most pressing economic challenges. Collaboration is key in our effort, and this is why, and I'm happy to hear that Mr. Kato mentioned what we're doing with the JICA, in working with JICA to develop recommendations for a new policy agenda that would inform discussions at the next TICAD 8. Drawing on data and analysis from our recent work on African Transformation Report and the upcoming African Transformation Index, which we're currently working on, which will be published in February next year. The African economies have not delivered enough, as we all know, in this first decade of the 21st century. And they are not where they should be, given their abundant resources, energized population, and eager workforce. The SDGs offer an important roadmap for action, but there are challenges to achieving these goals in less than a decade remaining, given the recent setbacks. We must now focus on policy agenda that makes immediate changes that improve people's life, including rapid creation of good quality jobs and medium to long-term transformation that would deliver the future we all want to see in the next generation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown, for that excellent presentation. Thank you all of you for those wonderful presentations. By the way, we will be providing those presentations to all participants, so you'll be able to get a copy of those presentations from all of the speakers. Now, I know that the director for the Regional Bureau for Africa has to go very soon. So Ahuna, before you go, can I just pose a couple of questions to you, and then you're free to hand over to Dr. Raymond Gilpin, who'll be standing in for you for the final 30 minutes. Okay, if you're ready, it's two-pronged question, I suppose. The first is a question that says, what strategic partnerships could support African countries and regional institutions as the continent builds forward stronger, smarter, and more sustainably? And the second part of the question is related to TICAD 8. In fact, there was a question in Japanese that popped up that said, I'll see how good my Japanese translation is, wa ilsu kaisai sa reru no deshu ka, which means, when will TICAD be held? It's going to be held in Tunisia in 2022, next year, but the date is yet to be set. So my question to you, Ahuna, on TICAD is, how could the TICAD 8 platform be instrumental in bringing a resilient, inclusive, and prosperous future across Africa through maybe some of the points that were highlighted by the panel members: accelerating regional transformation and integration, strengthening regional value chains, capitalizing on natural resources and human assets, the youth, and promoting investment? So how could TICAD 8 platform be instrumental in building a more prosperous Africa? So those are the questions. Go ahead, madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mark. I have literally 2 minutes, but let me say, I think it's really important that we connect better with the business community, the so-called private sector. This is, we can't afford not to if we want to break those chains of joblessness and poverty. We know that the public sector, however robust, cannot undertake this journey alone. So private sector at home and abroad is really the core. And it's good to see all the work being done with Mr. Subaki's presentation there, AIC, identifying the private business opportunities, private sector opportunities on the continent, and connecting them with Japanese businesses, and also identifying the potential for African economies and businesses to grow, particularly in the green area. So we need strong partnerships with the private sector, but also with the science community, science and technology, because if we're going to leapfrog, if we're going to take advantage of new technologies and digital transformation, we need those players to come on board, particularly on the infrastructure side, because we still have very low penetration in many African countries. So IT companies building that infrastructure, laying the lines that are required to connect communities. And that just takes me to TICAD, because we are really focusing on connectivity in Africa in TICAD 8. We really think that the digital is where the magic is going to happen on the continent in the next decade and more. And the more we can invest all the energy, all the resources, all the partnership interest in really equipping African government and business community with that digital infrastructure, the closer we will get to addressing inequality and the levels of extreme poverty that we see. You've seen the innovation that is possible on the continent. I mean, what AAIC presented is just the tip of the iceberg. We are seeing huge potential for innovations, particularly among young people. So this concept of entrepreneurship is one that we think it's a good, presents a new opportunity for us to, and that's why I think Dr. Brown's point on creating the enabling environment, conditions for business to thrive. We still have archaic laws and restrictions in many African countries that prevent business from growing. And so we need to look at regulations as a stimulus for business engagement, rather than regulations that stifle that business. And African governments definitely need that support in the policy-making realm. And that's what I think TICAD could do in building greater partnerships for that, the conditions for business to flourish, to be created. Back to you. And allow me to step down and leave the rest of the difficult questions to Raymond, who will step in as I step out. Thank you very much, and wish you all great conversation.
Thank you very much, Ahuna. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. And indeed, Raymond Gilpin, Dr. Gilpin is going to ably represent you, no doubt. I'll now turn, if I could, to Mr. Ryuichi Kato, sir, at JICA. This question goes to you. JICA has extensively supported the pilot and scale up of homegrown solutions, as you mentioned in your presentation, that have emerged out of COVID-19. Very fascinating. You've had initiatives with the AUC and the Ninja Startup Acceleration Program, where we've seen some immense business opportunities and a key for regional integration through establishment of regional value chains. So the question, sir, is what kind of partnerships or collaborations are needed for the Japanese private sector, and how does JICA engage them?
Thank you, Mark, for your question. Very good question. I think that the number of Japanese firms expanding its business to Africa is steadily increasing, but it hasn't yet led to the concrete outcomes. When we see the statistics of the investment balance on the stock basis, it shows even a decrease during the last decade. It means that the Japanese private sector in general is wavering in the face of the African market that is different from Asian one. However, it is very encouraging to know that the Japanese private sector is getting interested in the African startups, like Tsubaki-san. JICA is trying to match up Japanese investors with African startups. JICA promotes the establishment of local startup ecosystem in Africa, for example, in Rwanda, and also supports individual startups and entrepreneurs through various programs such as I mentioned earlier, Homegrown Solution Accelerator Program, Ninja Project, and also we have an arm of the private sector investment finance as well. On the other hand, sharing information on the progress of AFCFTA, which as mentioned earlier, with Japanese private sector is very important. In my view, implementation of AFCFTA needs not only trade facilitation, but also industrial development to formulate regional supply and value chain global, and to optimize AFCFTA's impact for development. In this regard, JICA will contribute to supporting capacity building of AFCFTA with a comprehensive approach that includes one-stop border post, that is trade facilitation, as well as Kaizen initiative. This is how can I say, industrial development and infrastructure development like ports and roads and etc. And also improvement the business environment in collaborating with private sectors. Lastly, regarding AFCFTA, JICA would like to share the Asian experience, especially ASEAN's one, to Africa. As you may know, ASEAN formulates very effective and competitive regional value chains. In ASEAN, both local and foreign investors, especially Japanese, are benefiting. It is important for Africa to examine the ASEAN model of regional integration in addition to EU model for their reference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kato, for that. I'm going to come back to you with a question about TCAT 8 in a moment, but I just want to move over to your compatriot, Mr. Susumu Subaki, CEO of AAIC. Now, you mentioned your renowned book that's big in Japan, Super Accelerated Economy Africa Future Business Map, Changed by Leapfrog. You've had a really big audience for that book. And as you say, I guess it indicates that there's a taste or an interest in Africa and Africa's development within Japan that is really, I guess, largely untapped. And so you talked about some of these investment opportunities that have emerged out of COVID-19 in the space of healthcare. So from the reaction you got from your book and through the direct business face-to-face consultations you have, I think you said you had 4 offices around Africa with Japanese companies. The question is, I guess, what kind of business and investment trends and challenges do you foresee by Japanese businesses and partners in the next few years in Africa?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very, very good question. Actually, all the time, mostly, Japanese trade company or a car company such as Toyota or this company already invest and get in the African market, but not the other, major Japanese companies yet. But recently, as the most of the consumer-related companies or more, the general company, very interested about to address to African market. Because as you know, most of the Japanese company already go to China, Southeast, and most of the Western. So recently they are trying to address the Indian market also, and the last resort is Africa. So as you know, the 1.4 billion population is going to maybe 2 billion or something. There's a huge opportunity there. At the same time, I found about same history comes. As I told you about the time machine model, it's Africa is maybe a Japanese 70s or the 18s there, and maybe China comes. It's China 30 years ago and the Southeast 10 years ago, 7 or 10 years ago, the India. So there is the same things that happen. So everybody wants to address the African market. But it's basically the geographically very far and historically very not so familiar. But last continent, so everybody want to address the African market. Yeah, that is some maybe the interest.
Mr. Sumo, I'm going to stay with you for a second because 2 people asked the same question basically and directed at you. In the Q&A. I'm turning to the Q&A now that's coming in, and I encourage everyone to get your questions in quickly because I'm watching the clock go down. If you could quickly answer in 1 minute or so. One says, thank you for your innovative presentation. It was very attractive to the young generations of Africans to hear it. The question is in relation to the leapfrog innovation you measured in your presentation. They noticed that most beneficiaries are Anglophone countries, which gloss to the benefits of East and South African countries and less benefits from West African countries. So could you help expand this to West Africa, especially Francophone? Someone else asked that same question about Francophone. Why are there no collaborations with Francophone countries or Central African countries, Mr. Susumu? Why? Why not? What are the bottlenecks?
Okay, I did want to show you about the geologically. As you know, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, actually, as you know, the largest GDP is Nigeria, right? So yes. The second largest South Africa, and next is Egypt. So from the investment point of view, we are firstly focused on the 4 countries. East is Kenya, South is the South Africa, West is Nigeria, North is Egypt. Actually, from the investment point of view, this 4 countries is a first-tier countries, I believe. But okay, I have an office in Africa mostly 10 years ago. It's in Africa, only a 1 incubation office and maybe a 10 or 12 ventures there. But now we have a 15 incubation office in Nairobi and maybe a 200 to 3,000 venture staff. So it's a time. So now new venture comes Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda also. Same things maybe happen in West Africa also. But the French territory a little bit late. Maybe I guess 7 years later as English colonized countries. It's my gut feeling. So North Africa is a totally different. So it's Arabic. So, but Egypt is high more advanced countries and many countries. So it's a time difference only. So I believe I established the next fund. The next fund more focuses on other areas. Second tier 2 countries. I believe there's a huge opportunity in second tier country also.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move now on to Dr. Ed Brown. Sir, Dr. Brown, this is your question, sir. Are you ready? Okay.
Yes.
African Transformation Report, recently published by ACET, advocates for greater regional collaboration, which you talked about, especially through the delivery of regional public goods like transport corridors and digital connectivity to address critical Pan-African issues such as job creation, technology, and climate that pose national problems but require regional solutions. Your question, Dr. Brown, is what is the practical role of external partners outside of the continent for promoting regional collaboration, such as Japanese public and private sectors?
Yes, thank you very much, Mark. I think this is a very important question because if you look, the traditional approach has been mainly country by country. And as we argue in the report, we realize that African economies are not transforming primarily because they are not collaborating among themselves, particularly around what we call the regional public goods. So going beyond just trade, you need to collaborate around regional public goods like transport corridors, digital connectivity, the riparian issues, and so on and so forth. Now, it is important that, given this new dispensation with AFCFTA, that the development partners, the EUs, the bilaterals generally, because the multilaterals also have a very strong regional orientation. But more often than not, the bilaterals are much more interested in country-to-country, engagements. And when you look, there are 15 landlocked countries in Africa, and many of them, if we want to be politically incorrect, are not going to be able to transform without integrating within the regional bodies network that exists in the countries to create the regional value chains. And I think it's heartening to hear that the Japanese are looking more at these regional interventions where there are national problems, but the solutions lie regionally. There are regional solutions to national problems. And therefore, if development partners are going to work with individual countries, they must have a regional perspective where they can support initiatives that bring these countries together around specific regional public goods. A good example is the digital connectivity with the AU strategic policies and so on, where there's a need to support that particular type of initiative in order to ensure that the smaller countries and the ones with less technology and capabilities can benefit from a regulatory framework that is more robust and benefits everyone. So you are bringing everybody along. So it is important that there has to be, in a sense, a mind shift or a strategic shift from country to country engagements, the EPAs and so on, to more of the regional type engagements, but also continuously working at the national level. In other words, the approach is a bottom up. The problems are national, but you need to look at them from a regional perspective, because when you begin to ask the question, for example, how do you diversify your economy? And when you begin to dig deeper into the issues of diversification, productivity increases, you realize that for your markets, you are so small and not capable of even having the basic commercial fundamentals to make it grow. So you need to integrate into regional supply and value chains. You see, if you are talking about export competitiveness, you need to look at the small and medium-sized enterprises in your country and ask the question: how can they become export competitive if they are not linked into the regional supply and value chains? So thinking local, but looking for regional solutions. And I think this is where development partners also need to shift their orientation in order to ensure that they can support national issues, but looking at it from a regional perspective. And we are particularly pleased that AFCFTA has come into being. It doesn't provide all the solutions, but it provides a political impetus and the strategic focus that is required. And countries should now, the development partners should be working a lot closely with these organizations and the regional economic groups also.
Doctor, when you say this, it sounds so obvious. So, I mean, you put it in very colloquial, simple terms. But has this kind of has this thinking? How far has this thinking penetrated the zeitgeist amongst partners? I mean, are they coming to this realization, or is this the sort of early stages of the recalibration and thinking locally and then regionally?
Yeah, I think it's beginning, and recently we've been seeing a lot. I mean, the EU-Africa engagements are now beginning to look a lot more within this perspective and look, identifying certain specific areas that we would call regional public goods and asking themselves, how do they ensure that they can provide the needed support to make sure that the regional public goods are benefiting the countries at the local level. So it's beginning to emerge, but still, I believe that there's still a lot of institutional rigidities that may not be, allowing these shifts to occur. But as we engage more with the development partners, the African think tanks and other organizations within the African space, engage more with the development think tanks, and emphasizing this importance and driving up the agenda, because we have done a few work in this area in the past. For example, the whole issue of talent mobility. Europe is concerned about mass movement of African labor into this. But if you look at it, the majority of labor moves within Africa, but talents are more likely to move outside because of labor market rigidities within Africa. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, permits for residency, the whole issue of employment possibilities and so on, and the cost of even doing that, they are huge. And each country continues to operate within that national boundary without thinking beyond and looking at how you can open the labor market to ensure flexibilities and therefore to crowd in the skills that are needed. Many of the problems we face in employment today are skill mismatch. Mm-hmm. The type of skills available are not the kinds needed by industry because of the evolving digitalization, innovations, and so on. At the same time, some countries have already begun to align themselves to this. So labor can move a lot. If labor can move freely, say from Ghana to Kenya, and your qualifications are recognized, or from Niger, where you have the French system, to say Ghana, or to Kenya, where you have the Anglophone system. So there's the need to harmonize qualification systems. There's the need to look at equivalencies in qualifications, and therefore harmonize them in ways that would enhance free movement of labor. But these rigidities are still there at the moment, and countries must begin to come together to look at it. So if you take a particular public good, say labor force mobility, it's a public good in the sense that as labor moves across, you're going to enhance productivity, you're going to enhance growth, incomes would rise, and so on. But at the same time, each country is living in isolation, so they need to collaborate. And this is where the donors can help if they think regionally and act local. In other words, help the local economies to think regionally, support regional interventions that require painstaking efforts to look at regulations, alignment to the treaties, and so on. The devil is in implementation, and it requires some kind of coordination at that level, using the REC sometimes, but also with other regional organizations that fit into that kind of public good.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Brown. I want to bring in Dr. Gilpin, if you can hear me, Raymond Gilpin, from UNDP's chief economist. Sir, can I fire a question at you from the Q&A? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great, great. It's a very early morning there, so I appreciate you getting up so early to join us. Komi Sowu is asking, the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA, opens a new era of trade governance in Africa and must be considered as an opportunity to undertake much needed structural reforms in many countries to support Africa's development agenda. What shall be done differently to make this happen?
Thank you so much, Mark, and to the questioner for what I think is a very important question. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area Arrangement, which came into force in January this year, is indeed a potential game changer. One of the challenges that Dr. Brown and a number of other speakers have already highlighted is the size, the small size of most African markets. We have 54 countries on the continent, and most of them, the vast majority, are really, really small. And so you have two problems. One, whether you talk about agriculture or industry or services, it's difficult to go to scale in a small market. And secondly, when you think about complementarity, for most of these small countries, trade relations have existed since colonial times. And the way we trade still follows those colonial trading patterns. Most Francophone countries will trade via France, most Anglophone via the United Kingdom. And what this does is it robs African countries of the opportunity to trade where it makes most sense, where they're most competitive. And one thing that could be done differently is to unpack some of the potential benefits of going to scale, i.e. having trade complementarity among African countries, making sure that the chocolates produced in Ghana could be sold easily in markets in Kenya. And the tourism opportunities in Cape Verde could be enjoyed by South Africans, removing a lot of the barriers that the tariff, non-tariff barriers, infrastructure barriers, regulatory barriers that make it difficult to do this within the continent. What's the benefit of this? One, greater efficiency. Secondly, greater profitability. Thirdly, you are then empowering the entrepreneurial spirit within these countries to not just look at how difficult it is to get within global value chains, because if you look at the global value chain for cocoa or for electronics, I'm thinking about coltan and tin ores in northeastern DRC, only about 5% or less of the value is retained on the continent. However, if we're able to do it regionally, then we start seeing a lot more of the value remaining. And once the value remains, also then you start seeing entrepreneurship would thrive a lot better, and you move from income generation to wealth creation. And once you start having assets in the communities, in the households, then things like investment, savings, etc., become different. That's one. Secondly, when we think about why we do development because, to put it very simply, we want to ensure that across the board for the average African, tomorrow is better than yesterday. And how do we do it within the context of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area? We are able to identify entry points for not just the producers, but also for the businesses that are from outside the continent that could also bring not just financing, but also technology, know-how, and managerial skills that would make these not just profitable and development friendly, but also sustainable. And so a lot of the projections that look at the Africa continental market growing to as much as 1.2 trillion US dollar equivalent in a few years is predicated on these changes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gilpin. Very insightful comments there. Can I noticed that in the Q&A, Dr. Cato, you're very popular. Lots of questions heading your way about JICA. Can I do a double-pronged question? The first one comes from Ekote Nelson Noko. Ekote Nelson Noko. He wants to know, many Japanese companies are risk adverse and they lack enough motivation to venture into private investment in Africa at this time. What does JICA and UNDP do to enhance their motivation, the motivation of these Japanese companies in doing business in Africa? That's the first half. But I also, if time permits, want to ask you about TCAD as well, because you are the main fulcrum at JICA for TCAD. How could the TCAD 8 platform be used? How could it be a platform to bring a more resilient, inclusive, and prosperous future across Africa? We'll all be together in Tunisia in 2022, date yet to be announced, of course. So can you crystal ball gaze as to the relevance and importance to Africa and African development on TCAD 8? So go ahead, sir, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. To encourage Japanese firms, companies, which are a little bit reluctant to expanding its business to Africa, I would like to, how can I say, first, encourage through sharing information's African market. It is very important for Japanese companies. And also, I would like to improve the business environment, of course, together with the other development partners for in African countries, so that Japanese firms and entrepreneurs can easily go into the market, African market. This is the first answers for the first question. The second one is a TCAD 8. I think that the others have already mentioned and highlighted the some keywords for the TCAD 8. In my view, first is the innovation, as we all agreed that innovation. At TCAD 7, last TCAD 7, we have started discuss innovation under the theme of the advancing Africa's development through people, technology, and innovation. I strongly believe that the TCAD 8 will need to continue to accelerate innovation, notably through digital transformation and startup acceleration. Second is also, we have already discussed integration. In order to promote regional integration in Africa, it might be crucial to support and realize the continental agenda, which are treated by African Union and related organizations such as AUDA, NEPAD, Africa CDC, FAFCFTA, so forth. In such very diverse areas as social, economic development, and also peace and security. And third is the, how can I say, green or climate. Climate change is now threatening Africa much more than the past decades in terms of food security, disaster risk, water supply, and so forth. This could be linked to peace and stability of each country and society. TCAD 8 will need to face and adapt to these new arising risks, threats, and also opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we're pretty much out of time now. The recording, by the way, of this excellent session will be available on UNDP's YouTube channel. So if you want to go there, you can have a look and also tweet and send it around to your friends. Also, I think we're pretty much out of time. We've heard some excellent, I can't really sum up everything that we've heard, but we've heard some excellent interventions, kicking off with Ahuna Eziakonwa of the Regional Bureau for Africa, talking about how COVID-19 had reversed 3 decades of development progress in Africa and wiped off 25 years of progress in terms of the first recession for 25 years. She talked about how Africa deserves a just climate transition in order for us to go forward, and then gave some panaceas or solutions largely related to partnerships and collaboration with the likes of JICA. Mr. Cato, thank you so much for your robust interventions. I think what really jumps out is how you really are committed. JICA is really committed to deepening relationships across Africa with the likes of Africa CDC and many others. Some very exciting projects, school projects, and market orientation projects around agriculture that you shared with us, that all basically have sort of homegrown solutions at the center of what you're doing. Mr. Subaki, that was very interesting to hear. And also really, I think your passion was very infectious about how you really do see the future of Africa, and almost you're something of an evangelist for the continent in Japan, not just with your book, but it seems as if you're sort of penetrating the sort of consciousness of the Japanese investor community and business communities there, for which we're most grateful. I hope you will be at TCAD 8 and that we can meet in person. Some real practical solutions also came from Dr. Ed. You were jettisoned in at the last moment to stand in for your principal, Dr. KY Amoako, the president of the African Center for Economic Transformation, but you were more than ready to help with that. It was really interesting to hear you demystify this idea of transformation, growth, and depth, but also some of the practical policies that you discussed that were vital to strengthening Africa, like resource mobilization, identifying tax loopholes, better tax collection, digital innovation. You even mentioned, you touched on diaspora finance. And I've noticed from the Q&As, there was a very positive response. People really liked what they were hearing from you. So thank you very much, Dr. Brown, for stepping in. Also, Dr. Gilpin as well, for holding fort for UNDP RBA for the last 30 minutes. I wish we had another 30 minutes, but we don't. So I'm going to have to round everything up now. My name is Mark Edo. It's been a pleasure to join this very special session, and I hope that we get an opportunity to speak again. Thank you very much to all the panelists. I'm going to round things up, but thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
加藤さん、どうもありがとうございました。
どうもありがとうございました。椿さん、ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございます。
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.